Chapter 1. The Scent of Gold and Dust. The mop handle was a familiar weight in Amara's hands, a smooth, worn friend. Her world smelled of lemon polish and bleach. But tonight, something else tainted the air. It was the scent of power. A thick, metallic perfume of old bloodlines and older money, a perfume that clung to the marble floors no matter how hard she scrubbed. She moved like a ghost through the great hall, a whisper of gray against the blinding gold and crimson of the pack elite. They were peacocks, all of them. Shifters preening in silks and jewels, their laughter sharp and cruel, like shattering glass. Her goal was simple: be invisible. Do the job. Get out. Because notice was a dangerous currency in this world, and she was broke. Amara kept her head down, her focus a tight knot on the swirl of dirt she was erasing. Her cart, with its squeaking wheels she never bothered to fix, was her shield. People stepped aside for a cleaner's cart. They didn't see the girl pushing it. They just saw an obstacle, a momentary inconvenience in their glittering lives. This was her safety, her camouflage. She saw everything from behind this shield, though. She saw the flick of a wrist that dismissed a servant, the cold smile that didn't reach the eyes, the way their human forms never quite hid the predators circling just beneath the skin. They were beautiful monsters, and she was just a mouse hoping not to be seen, or crushed. Sometimes in the quiet moments between the roar of their voices, she would let her mind wander. What would it be like? To be seen, truly seen, for just 1 second? To have someone look at her and not look through her? The thought was a dangerous spark, a foolish little dream that tasted like ash, because she knew exactly what happened when people like her caught the eye of people like them. She'd learned that lesson a long, long time ago. A lesson written in blood and fire, a memory she kept locked away in the deepest part of her soul. Still, the question haunted her. Is this it? Is this all I'm ever going to be? Beyond her immediate task, the hall pulsed with a nervous energy. The Alpha King, Klein Drake, was expected to make an appearance at the ceremony tonight. The name alone was a heavy thing, a rock that could shatter the fragile peace of the pack. Whispers followed the name like smoke. He was ruthless, they said. He was powerful beyond measure, a king born from a lineage of kings. He was a shifter whose wolf was so dominant, so primal, that most couldn't even meet his eyes. Amara shivered, polishing a stubborn scuff mark with more force than necessary. She didn't need to see him. She just needed the night to end. Then again, the feeling of being watched was unmistakable. It started as a prickle on the back of her neck, a sudden coldness that had nothing to do with the drafty hall. She risked a glance up from her work, her eyes scanning the milling crowds on the floor. Nothing. Just the same arrogant faces, the same dismissive glances. But the feeling persisted, stronger now. It was a focused gaze, an intense scrutiny that felt different from the casual disdain she was used to. It wasn't coming from the floor. It was coming from above. Her gaze lifted, sweeping past the golden chandeliers to the shadowed balcony that overlooked the hall. A figure stood there, half hidden by a marble column. He wasn't dressed like the others. No silks, no jewels, just simple dark clothes. But the way he stood, still and silent, radiating a quiet authority that reached her even from across the vast expanse. It made the air in her lungs freeze. He was looking right at her. Chapter 2. A king in simple clothes. The man from the balcony was suddenly there. One moment, he was a shadow in the distance. The next, he stood beside her cart, blocking her path. Amara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. He was tall, built with a lean strength that his simple clothes couldn't hide. But it was his face that held her captive. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes. Eyes the color of a stormy forest, deep and ancient, and filled with a startling intelligence. They saw her. Not the uniform, not the mop. Her. The shock of it stole her breath. People didn't do that. They didn't look at her. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was a low rumble, calm and steady, yet it vibrated through her, a current of unexpected warmth. It didn't have the sneering edge of the other elites. It was different. I'm looking for the West Service entrance. I seem to be a little lost. Amara blinked, forcing herself out of her stupor. Her training, her survival instinct, screamed at her. Don't engage. Answer. Disappear. She pointed with her chin down a long, ornate corridor. That way, past the kitchens. You can't miss it. Her voice was clipped, rougher than she intended. A defense. A wall. He didn't move. He just watched her, a small, curious smile playing on his lips. It was unnerving. She felt like a puzzle he was slowly, methodically solving. Thank you, he said, but his eyes told her the conversation wasn't over. It's loud in here tonight. It wasn't a question. It was an observation, an invitation she had no intention of accepting. What did this man want? These people never made small talk with the staff unless they wanted something. She just shrugged, turning back to her mop. It's a party. She hoped her dismissal was clear. Go away. Leave me alone. Let me be invisible. The silence stretched, and she could feel his gaze on her, as tangible as a touch. Why wasn't he leaving? Her skin prickled. This was wrong. This was dangerous. Every instinct she had honed over a decade of surviving in the shadows was screaming at her. He was a predator, just a quieter, more patient one than the others. Finally, he spoke again, his voice softer this time, closer. You don't miss much, do you? He murmured. She froze, her knuckles white on the mop handle. How could he know that? How could he see that in her? She risked looking up, meeting his stormy gaze. There was no mockery there, only a genuine, unnerving curiosity. I've been watching, he admitted, his voice a low confidence. You see everything. The way that Beta spilled his drink to embarrass the servant. The way that woman switched the place cards at the head table. You see it all from the shadows. He took a step closer and she caught his scent. Pine and wild earth and something else. Something that called to a part of her she didn't know existed. What else do you see, little ghost? Chapter 3. Whispers in the Shadows. Amara's blood ran cold. Little ghost. That's what he'd called her. He saw her, not as a cleaner, but as an observer. A spy. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had to get away from him. I don't know what you're talking about, she lied, her voice tight. I'm just doing my job. She pushed her cart forward, forcing him to step aside. She didn't look back. She couldn't. But she could feel his eyes on her, a physical weight that followed her as she fled into the relative safety of the crowded hall. Her invisibility felt thin, fragile, like a veil that was about to be ripped away. Needing a moment to breathe, she steered her cart into a secluded alcove behind a massive tapestry depicting some ancient, bloody werewolf battle. Her hands were shaking. Who was he? He wasn't dressed like an elite, but he carried himself with an authority that dwarfed everyone in the room. Just as she was calming her frantic pulse, two voices drifted from the other side of the tapestry. She recognized them instantly. Lucian and Marcus, two ambitious betas known for their cruelty. The king is weak. Lucian's voice was a venomous whisper. He spends his time with commoners trying to understand their pathetic lives. He has forgotten that power, true power, is taken, not given. The council grows restless, Marcus added, his tone greedy. The ceremony is the perfect time. A little chaos, a tragic accident, and the Drake line ends. A new, stronger alpha can rise. Amara pressed herself flat against the cold stone wall, trying to make her breathing silent. This was more than just political maneuvering. This was treason. The casual way they spoke of killing the Alpha King, it sent a chill down her spine. It reminded her of other whispers, other plots. A flash of memory seared her mind. The smell of smoke, her mother's scream, her father's desperate, fading growl. They had been betrayed by whispers just like these, by ambitious wolves who saw power as a prize to be won at any cost. She had to get out of there. Slowly, carefully, she began to back away, her rubber-soled shoes making no sound on the marble. She just had to get back to the service corridors, back to the safety of her anonymity. She turned, her mind racing, and walked straight into a solid chest. Strong hands gripped her arms to steady her, and a jolt of pure electricity shot through her body, sharp and shocking. It was him, the man from before. His storm-colored eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with concern as he saw the terror on her face. "Careful," he murmured, his voice a low thrum that vibrated right through her soul. His grip was firm, protective, and for one insane moment, she didn't want him to let go. He leaned in closer, his gaze searching hers, and his voice dropped to a whisper meant only for her. "It's easy to get lost in the shadows here, isn't it?" Chapter 4. A Whisper of Falling Stars. His words hung in the air between them, a threat and a promise all at once. Before Amara could pull away, a sound cut through the hall's clamor. It was a high, thin whisper, a sound like a wire singing under too much strain. Her head snapped up. High above, the grand chandelier, a monstrosity of gold and crystal the size of a carriage, swayed. It wasn't the gentle, rhythmic sway of a draft. This was a sick, jerking motion. Wrong. All wrong. Her eyes, trained to notice every detail, every imperfection, caught it instantly. A thick, braided cable near the ceiling was unraveling, its metal strands snapping one by one, like a spider's thread breaking in slow motion. And beneath the shimmering crystals, a faint, acrid smell drifted down. The scent of corrosive magic, sharp and biting like burnt ozone. It was sabotage. Her gaze shot from the fraying wire down to the floor below. Directly in the chandelier's path stood the man, the stranger. He was looking up at her, a question in his stormy eyes, completely unaware of the death hanging over his head. There was no time. No time to think, no time to scream, no time to weigh the consequences. Her body moved on pure, raw instinct. A guttural cry ripped from her throat as she launched herself from the alcove. The world narrowed to a single point. Him. She slammed into his hard body with all her strength. The impact was jarring, knocking the wind from both of them. He grunted in surprise, stumbling backward, his strong arms wrapping around her reflexively as they fell. A deafening shriek of tortured metal tore through the hall. Then came the crash. It was an apocalypse of sound and light. The chandelier hit the marble floor with the force of a lightning strike, exploding into a million glittering shards. Crystal shrapnel flew through the air like deadly hail. The floor bucked beneath them. Screams erupted from all around, a symphony of terror. Amara was shielded by the man's body, her face pressed into his simple tunic, the scent of pine and wild earth filling her senses, drowning out the dust and destruction. For a moment, there was only the ringing in her ears and the frantic, steady beat of his heart against her cheek. He had saved her as much as she had saved him. Slowly, the chaos began to filter back in. People were shouting. Guards were barking orders. The air was thick with a choking cloud of pulverized crystal and plaster. The man shifted, his arms tightening around her for a fraction of a second before he pushed them both up. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice a low growl, raw with adrenaline. She could only shake her head, her eyes wide with shock, fixed on the mangled heap of gold and wire that lay exactly where they had been standing seconds before. Guards in the king's silver and black livery swarmed the area, forming a protective circle around them, their swords drawn. They weren't looking at the wreckage. They were looking at him. They were protecting him. A cold, sickening dread washed over Amara, a dread that had nothing to do with the near-death experience. Why were the royal guards protecting a man in commoner's clothes? Chapter 5. The Face of the Wolf. The guards moved with terrifying efficiency. Rough hands grabbed Amara, hauling her to her feet. Her brief, insane connection with the stranger was severed. Panic flared in her chest, hot and sharp. "She's with me." His voice cut through the noise, a command that stopped the guards cold. It was the same voice, yet it was different. Sharper, harder. It was the voice of someone who expected to be obeyed without question. He strode to her side, his stormy eyes scanning her for injuries, a muscle in his jaw tight with fury. He placed a hand on the small of her back, a gesture that was both possessive and protective, and steered her away from the wreckage. Nobody stopped them. Nobody dared. They were escorted through the panicked crowd, a silent bubble of authority in a sea of chaos. They didn't take her to a dingy security office. They led her up a private staircase, through corridors of gold and velvet she had only ever been allowed to scrub. The guards posted themselves outside a set of massive, ornate doors, and the man led her inside alone. It was a royal study, filled with ancient books, maps, and the heavy scent of leather and power. He walked to a large oak desk and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter, his hands surprisingly steady. He offered one to her. She stared at it, unmoving, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and terror. Who was he? What was happening? He seemed to understand her silence. He placed the glass on a nearby table and turned to face her, the firelight from the hearth casting his sharp features in flickering shadow. "You saved my life," he said, his voice quiet now, intense. "You saw it before anyone else, before my own royal guard. How?" Amara swallowed hard, her throat dry. The cable," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "It was fraying, and there was a smell." His eyes sharpened, locking onto hers. What kind of smell? This was it, the decision point. Her survival had always depended on being invisible, on knowing nothing, on seeing nothing. But she had seen something, and hiding it now, hiding it from this man who commanded royal guards with a single word, felt infinitely more dangerous than speaking the truth. "Magic," she breathed. It smelled like corrosive magic, like someone wanted to make sure the wire wouldn't just break. They wanted it to disintegrate. A dark, dangerous look crossed his face. He nodded slowly, as if she had just confirmed his darkest suspicions. He ran a hand through his dark hair, and for the first time she saw the weight he carried. It was a crushing burden, the weight of a kingdom. He walked towards the fire, his back to her. When he turned around again, he was no longer just a man. He had shed the skin of the commoner. In his eyes, in his stance, in the very air around him, was the unquestionable, suffocating authority of a predator. An alpha. The alpha. "My name," he said, his voice low and laced with a power that made the very room seem to tremble, "is Klein Drake." He was the king. The Alpha King. And Amara realized with a soul-crushing certainty that she hadn't just been trapped in a room with him. She had been trapped in his orbit from the moment he first saw her on the balcony. Chapter 6. A Gilded Cage. The name dropped into the silent room like a stone into a deep, dark well. Klein Drake, the Alpha King. Amara's world tilted on its axis, and all the air rushed out of her lungs. The man who had looked at her with such unnerving curiosity, the man whose touch had felt like a spark of lightning, the man she had just saved, was the monster from the stories. The ruthless ruler. The apex predator at the top of her world's food chain. A cold, hard knot of terror formed in her stomach. Her instinct, the one she had trusted her entire life, had been right. He was dangerous. She had just massively underestimated how dangerous. He was the ultimate elite, the very embodiment of the power that had crushed her family and left her an orphan, and she had just made herself unforgettable to him. You're the king," she whispered, the words feeling like dust and ashes in her mouth. "I am," Klein confirmed, his gaze never leaving her face. He was watching her, gauging her reaction with that same intense focus she'd felt from the balcony. He saw the blood drain from her face. He saw the terror in her eyes. He also saw the flicker of something else, a spark of defiance, of anger, buried deep beneath the fear. And you, Amara Klein, have just become the most important person in this palace. His words were not a comfort. They were a death sentence. To be important was to be a target. No, she said, shaking her head, taking a step back. No, I'm not. I'm nobody. I saw something, I acted, that's it. Just let me go. I won't say anything to anyone, I'll disappear. I'm good at it. A sad, humorless smile touched his lips. It's too late for that. You didn't just see a faulty wire. You identified magic. You confirmed that the attack came from within my own court. He walked towards her, his movements fluid and silent, the movements of a hunter. The person who did this will not rest until every loose end is eliminated. And right now, you are the biggest loose end. He stopped just before her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. I can't let you go, Amara. Not because I don't trust you, but because I can't protect you out there. Her mind raced, searching for an escape, an exit. But there was none. He was right. She knew too much. The saboteur, Lucian or Marcus or whoever they were, would surely come for her. But being protected by the king felt like a different kind of trap. A more complicated one. A more dangerous one. What did he really want? Information? An ally? A pawn? She looked into his stormy eyes and saw a frustrating mix of cold calculation and something else. Something warmer, more personal, that scared her even more. So, what happens now? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Now, he said, his voice softening just a fraction. You stay here, in the royal wing. You will have a room, guards, anything you need. You will be my guest until I have found the traitor who tried to kill me. He reached out, his fingers gently tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was electric, sending a shiver down her spine. You will be safe. I give you my word. The doors to the study opened, and 2 guards stepped inside, their faces impassive. Klein dropped his hand, the warmth of his touch lingering on her skin like a brand. He had just offered her a gilded cage. And as the guards flanked her, ready to escort her to her new prison, Amara knew she had no choice but to step inside. Her old life was over. Chapter 7. The Silence of Silk and Stone. The silence was the first thing she noticed. It was a thick, heavy thing, completely different from the quiet of her own small apartment. Her quiet was born of solitude. This silence was born of power. It filled the opulent room she'd been given, a chamber larger than her entire life, draped in silks the color of twilight and furnished with dark, polished wood that gleamed like still water. It felt wrong. She was a creature of echoes and scuff marks, of the rattle and squeak of a cleaning cart. This place, with its plush carpets that swallowed every footstep, was a cage. A beautiful, luxurious cage, but a cage all the same. The servants who brought her food moved with the same unnatural quiet. They'd set the silver trays down, their eyes darting everywhere but at her, their faces a perfect, unnerving mask of polite fear. To them, she was an anomaly, a ghost who had suddenly been given flesh and blood, a cleaner who now slept in a guest suite in the royal wing. It made no sense. And in their world, things that made no sense were dangerous. She spent the first day exploring her prison. She paced the room, memorizing the placement of the furniture, the view from the armored glass window that overlooked the gardens, the patrol patterns of the 2 royal guards stationed outside her door. Her old survival instincts kicked in, overriding the shock. Learn the territory, find the weaknesses, look for an escape route. But there were no weaknesses. The place was a fortress. She was trapped, completely at the mercy of the Alpha King. Why? The question beat against the inside of her skull like a trapped bird. Why go to all this trouble for a cleaner? He could have had her quietly taken care of, silenced for good. It would have been easier, cleaner. The fact that he had chosen to protect her instead, was the most terrifying part of it all, because it meant he wanted something from her. That night, sleep refused to come. She lay on top of the silken duvet, still in her drab work uniform, feeling like a smudge of dirt on a pristine painting. A soft knock echoed on her door. Not the formal rap of a guard, but something gentler, hesitant. Before she could answer, the door opened and Klein stepped inside, alone. He wasn't dressed in royal finery, but in the same simple, dark clothes she'd first seen him in. He carried a small tray with a steaming bowl of soup and a piece of fresh bread. "The servant said you haven't eaten," he said, his voice a low murmur in the quiet room. He set the tray on a small table near the window. The gesture was so simple, so shockingly normal. A king, serving soup to a cleaner. It was so absurd it almost made her want to laugh or cry. She sat up, pulling her knees to her chest, a defensive posture she didn't even realize she was taking. "I'm not hungry." The lie was thin, her stomach having been a tight, empty knot of anxiety all day. He didn't push. He just nodded, pulling a chair up and sitting near the table, creating a space between them that felt both vast and strangely intimate. "I know this is—" He trailed off, searching for the right word. "A lot. I know you're scared, Amara, but I meant what I said. I will keep you safe." He looked at her then, his stormy eyes holding none of the cold authority of the Alpha King. In the dim light of the room, he just looked like a man, a tired, burdened man. "But I can't do it if you shut me out completely. Talk to me." Chapter 8. A Game of Wolves. Talk about what? Amara's voice was barely a whisper. About how my life got turned upside down because I was in the wrong place at the wrong time? About how I'm now a prisoner in a palace I used to scrub? Each word was a sharp little stone she threw at him, trying to keep him at a distance. She needed him to be the monster from the stories. It was easier that way. Safer. The kind, concerned man sitting in her room was far more dangerous, because he made a foolish part of her want to trust him. Klein didn't flinch. He just held her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Talk about them. The ones you heard whispering. The ones who want me dead." Before she could answer, another knock sounded at the door, this one sharper, more arrogant. A guard's voice came through the thick wood. "Your Majesty, Alpha Lucian is here. He insists on speaking with the girl to offer his sympathies for her ordeal." A low growl rumbled in Klein's chest, a primal sound that vibrated through the floor. The air in the room grew thick, heavy with a sudden, suffocating pressure. The king was gone, and the Alpha was there, a predator whose territory had just been challenged. "Let him in," Klein said, his voice deceptively calm. He stood, positioning himself between Amara and the door, a silent, immovable wall. The door swung open and Lucian strode in, his handsome face arranged in a mask of perfect concern. He was tall and blonde with the kind of polished charm that set Amara's teeth on edge. His eyes, the color of pale ice, swept the room and landed on her, a flicker of something possessive and hungry in their depths. "Amara, my dear," Lucian began, his voice smooth as honey. "I was so horrified to hear what happened, to think you were put in such danger." He took a step towards her, but Klein shifted his weight, a subtle movement that stopped Lucian cold. The tension in the room was a living thing, a coiled serpent ready to strike. It was a silent battle of wills, a clash of dominance that Amara was trapped in the middle of. "Her name is not to be spoken by you, Lucian." Klein's voice was soft, but it carried the deadly promise of violence. "She is under my protection. You are not welcome here." Lucian's charming smile didn't falter, but his eyes glittered with malice. He looked past Klein directly at Amara. "Of course, Your Majesty. I only wish to ensure the young lady feels safe. After all, in these dangerous times, one must be careful who they trust. His words were a clear threat, aimed at her, meant to poison her against Kaylin. He was marking her, showing Kaylin and her that he saw her as a piece on the board, a prize, a weakness. He gave a slight bow, his icy gaze lingering on her for a moment too long, before he turned and left the room. The moment the door closed, the oppressive energy vanished, leaving Amara breathless. She had just witnessed a silent declaration of war, and she was the battlefield. Kaylin turned to her, his own eyes dark with a fury he was struggling to contain. "Stay away from him," he commanded. And it wasn't the order of a king. It was the possessive, guttural plea of a male protecting what was his. Chapter 9. The Serpent's Drink. The encounter with Lucian left Amara trembling. The mask had slipped, and for a moment, she had seen the true wolf beneath the handsome face. A cold, calculating predator. It solidified the danger she was in. Kaylin's presence, which minutes ago had felt like a threat, now felt like the only solid thing in a world that was trying to tear her apart. He saw the fear in her eyes, and his expression softened, the hard edges of the Alpha King receding once more. "He won't get near you again," he promised, his voice low and firm. "I'll double the guard." He didn't leave. Instead, he settled back into the chair as if their conversation had never been interrupted. The soup sat on the table between them, forgotten. "You were telling me about your past," he prompted gently, though it felt less like an interrogation now and more like an attempt to understand. "You grew up in the foster system, I was told." Amara nodded, her throat tight. "Yes." She gave him the same story she gave everyone, the simple, clean version that hid the bloody, complicated truth. "My parents died when I was young. A fire." It was the easiest lie, plausible, tragic. It invited pity, not questions. But Kaylin's eyes were too perceptive. He seemed to see the cracks in her story, the shadows she was hiding behind. "I'm sorry," he said, and he sounded like he truly meant it. No one should have to grow up alone. His words hit a little too close to home. He was an orphan too, in his own way. His parents had been assassinated when he was a teenager, forcing him to become the Alpha King long before he was ready. Did he see a flicker of his own loneliness in her? Was that why he was so drawn to her? As they sat in the charged silence, a sudden commotion erupted in the corridor outside. A choked cry, the sound of shattering glass, and then frantic, panicked shouts. Kaylin was on his feet in an instant, moving with a speed that was barely human. He threw the door open, Amara right behind him. A servant girl was on the floor, convulsing, white foam frothing at her lips. A silver tray lay overturned beside her, its contents, a pitcher of wine and 2 goblets, spilled across the ornate rug. One of the guards was kneeling beside the girl, shouting for a medic. "What happened?" Kaylin demanded, his voice cracking like a whip. The other guard, his face pale with shock, pointed a trembling finger at the spilled wine. "The girl, Your Majesty, she was bringing your nightly wine. She must have stumbled and tasted some of it." Poison. The word screamed in Amara's mind. The wine was meant for Kaylin. This was another attempt. Bolder this time. More direct. They were getting closer. Kaylin's jaw clenched so hard she could hear his teeth grind. He looked from the dying servant to the terrified guards, his eyes blazing with a cold, murderous rage. Then, his gaze found hers. He saw the horror on her face, but he also saw the quick, analytical way her eyes darted around, taking in every detail. In that moment, he wasn't just looking at a girl he needed to protect. He was looking at the only person in the entire palace who had proven they could see the threats he couldn't. His need for her was a raw, desperate thing. "The ceremony is in 3 days," he said, his voice a low, grim whisper meant only for her. "They are not going to stop." He held her gaze, and the unspoken question hung between them, heavy and absolute. "Will you help me? Will you?" Chapter 10. A Dance of Whispers. Amara's answer wasn't a word. It was a slow, deliberate nod, a silent agreement that passed between them in the chaos of the corridor, sealing a dangerous pact. From that moment on, a strange new rhythm began. By day, she was the king's mysterious guest, a ghost haunting the royal wing. But by night, she became his shadow. Klein would dismiss her guards, and she would lead him down winding service corridors she knew better than the back of her own hand. They moved through the palace's hidden veins, a world of steam and stone and dust that existed right beneath the gold and glitter. She taught him how to listen, not like a king, but like a cleaner. How to hear the whispers of the kitchen staff, the disgruntled gossip of the laundresses, the fearful secrets of the stable hands. She was his eyes and ears in the places he could never go, and he, in turn, became her shield. In the darkness of the palace's underbelly, the lines between them blurred. He wasn't a king and she wasn't a cleaner. They were just two people hunting a serpent in their midst. This newfound closeness, however, did not go unnoticed. Lucian, unable to get to her directly, chose a different weapon: words. The whispers started subtly at first. A rumor here, a suggestion there. The cleaner has the king's ear. She has him wrapped around her little finger. She's a spy from a rival pack using her body to gain his trust. The stories spread like a disease, twisting her from a victim into a villain. The servants who once looked at her with fear now looked at her with contempt. The guards' expressions grew colder, more suspicious. Lucian was expertly isolating her, painting her as a low-born manipulator so that when he finally made his move, no one would believe she was innocent. The weight of the stares and whispers was a heavy cloak she couldn't take off. It was a different kind of invisibility, a more painful one, where everyone saw her, but they saw a monster of their own making. Klein was furious. The rumors were a direct challenge to his authority, an insult to his judgment. It made him even more protective of her, his presence a constant simmering heat at her side. One evening, as they reviewed a schematic of the grand hall in a hidden alcove, he saw the exhausted look on her face, the way she flinched when a guard walked by. He reached out, his hand covering hers where it rested on the table. The touch was warm, solid. "I'm sorry, Amara," he said, his voice a low growl. "This is my fault. You're paying the price for my enemies." She looked down at his large, calloused hand covering her own. A king's hand, a hand that could command armies and sign death warrants. And yet, it was gentle. "They're my enemies too, aren't they?" she whispered, finally admitting the truth aloud. "Whoever they are, they want us both gone." It was the first time she had said us. The word hung in the air, a fragile, powerful thing. Klein's thumb stroked the back of her hand, a slow, possessive gesture that sent a shiver through her. His eyes darkened, his gaze dropping to her lips. The air grew thick, charged with an energy that had nothing to do with plots or poison. The hunt for the serpent had entangled them in a different kind of trap, one made of stolen moments and a dangerous, undeniable attraction. Chapter 11. The Ghost's Echo. They sought refuge in the one place they thought was truly safe, the king's private library. It was an ancient, circular room, a fortress of knowledge with walls lined from floor to ceiling with books that smelled of leather and time. There were no hidden passages, only one door, guarded by Klein's most loyal men. It was here they began to piece together the puzzle. Klein spoke of his father's reign, of old alliances and bitter rivalries. Amara, feeling a strange sense of comfort in the quiet, dusty room, spoke of the whispers she'd gathered from the staff, a new guard with ties to Lucian's family, a shipment of rare herbs known for their corrosive properties. They were a team. For the first time in a very long time, Amara felt like she belonged somewhere. "Lucian's father was my father's biggest rival," Klein explained, his finger tracing a lineage in a heavy, leather-bound book. He always believed the Drake family was too soft, too willing to make peace with the human world. He wanted a return to the old ways, a world where wolves ruled. A chill went down Amara's spine. And Lucian feels the same way. He feels it stronger, Kaelin said grimly. He hides it behind a charming smile. But he is a fanatic. He looked up from the book, his eyes meeting hers across the heavy oak table. Which is why I don't understand why he's so focused on you. You're not part of this. But they both knew that wasn't true anymore. It happened in the blink of an eye. A flicker, a shimmer in the air near the far wall, like heat rising from pavement. Kaelin felt it first, a prickle of wrongness against his alpha senses. He was on his feet, a low growl tearing from his chest. "Get down!" he roared. But there was nothing there. Just the ancient books and the swirling dust motes in the moonlight. Amara stared, confused, trying to see what he saw. Then she saw it too. A distortion. The air itself seemed to bend and warp around an invisible shape that was moving toward Kaelin with unnatural speed. A magical cloak. It was an assassin. He lunged from the invisibility, a glint of silver in his hand. A dagger, its edge glowing faintly, coated in wolfsbane. Kaelin moved to intercept him, a blur of motion, but the assassin was too fast, too close. Time slowed to a crawl. Amara saw the blade arcing towards Kaelin's heart. She saw the snarl of triumph on the killer's face, a scream built in her throat, a scream of pure primal terror. But it wasn't a scream that came out. It was something else. A wave of force, blue and ethereal, erupted from her. A silent, concussive blast of raw power. The assassin was lifted off his feet as if swatted by a giant invisible hand and slammed into the far wall with a sickening crunch of bone. He crumpled to the floor unconscious, the silver dagger clattering across the wood. The room fell silent. Amara stared at her hands, which were trembling uncontrollably, faintly glowing with the same ghostly blue light. What was that? What had she just done? Chapter 12. The Name of the Lost. The silence in the library was a living thing, broken only by the sound of Amara's ragged breaths. The ghostly blue light faded from her hands, leaving them feeling cold and foreign, as if they belonged to someone else. She stared at them, then at the crumpled form of the assassin against the far wall, and a wave of nausea and vertigo washed over her. The power that had surged through her was gone, leaving behind a terrifying hollow echo. It had felt natural, like a language she'd forgotten she knew how to speak. Kaelin was at her side in an instant, his hands gripping her shoulders, steadying her. He wasn't looking at the assassin. He was staring at her, his stormy eyes wide with a mix of awe, shock, and 1,000 questions. "Amara?" he breathed, his voice rough with disbelief. "What was that?" I don't know," she stammered, shaking her head, the words catching in her throat. I saw him and it just happened." Her mind was a chaotic storm. She wasn't a shifter. She had never transformed, never felt the pull of the moon, never had anything but human weakness. What was she? The guards burst into the room, alerted by the noise, their swords drawn. They froze at the scene. Their king, alive, a downed assassin, and Amara, trembling in Kaelin's arms. Kaelin barked orders, his voice regaining its command. "Take him to the dungeons. I want him alive. Not a word of this to anyone. Understand?" The guards, their faces a mixture of confusion and fear, nodded and dragged the unconscious man away. Once they were alone again, Kaelin led her to a chair, his grip on her arm gentle but firm, as if he was afraid she might shatter. He knelt before her, taking her trembling hands in his. "Your name," he said, his voice low and urgent. "It's Amara Klein, isn't it? That's what the orphanage record said." She nodded, confused by the question. "Yes. Why?" "The Kleins," he said, his voice trailing off as he stared at her, really stared at her, as if seeing her for the very first time. It wasn't a common name. It was a noble line, a powerful one. They were known for unique gifts. Not the brute strength of an alpha, but something else, something older. He rose and went to a locked case on the far side of the room, retrieving a dusty, ancient-looking tome. He flipped through the brittle pages until he found what he was looking for. He pointed to a faded crest, a snarling wolf wreathed in ethereal blue flames. "The Klein family crest," he whispered. They were the royal battle mages, shifters who could channel their wolf's spirit not just into physical form, but into raw energy. They were the sworn protectors of my family line, until they were wiped out in a purge 50 years ago. Amara stared at the crest, her heart pounding. Klein. Her name wasn't just a name. It was a legacy of power. "Wiped out?" she breathed. "But my parents..." Kaylin's eyes met hers, and in them she saw a terrible, dawning realization. The official story was that they faded into obscurity, that the line died out. But my father always suspected they were betrayed, hunted down by those who feared their power. He looked from the book to her, the pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place, forming a picture more terrifying than either of them could have imagined. "Amara, the fire that killed your parents. I don't think it was an accident. I think the people trying to kill me are the same people who finished the job they started 50 years ago. They aren't just trying to seize a throne. They are trying to erase a bloodline. Yours." Chapter 13, An Echo of Blue Fire. The revelation of her name, her true name, didn't break Amara. It forged her. The fear that had been her constant companion for a decade was burned away by a white-hot rage. Her life hadn't been a random tragedy. It had been an assassination. Her parents hadn't been victims of a simple fire. They had been erased. And the people responsible were still out there, still hunting, still trying to finish the job. The quiet, invisible cleaner was gone, and in her place stood the last daughter of the House of Klein. For the first time, her goal wasn't just to survive. It was to fight back. Her purpose was no longer to remain unseen, but to uncover the truth and claim vengeance for the family she barely remembered. She was no longer a ghost. She was a hunter. Kaylin saw the change in her immediately. The fear in her eyes had been replaced by a hard, glittering resolve that mirrored his own. They were no longer just king and subject, protector and victim. They were allies bound by a shared enemy and a bloody history. "They fear your power, Amara," he said that night, leading her deep into the castle's foundations, to a cavernous training room carved from the bedrock. "That's why they hunted your family. It's our greatest weapon against them, but only if you can learn to control it." He stood before her in the torchlit darkness, his presence a solid grounding force. "I want you to try. Reach for it. Feel for that energy inside you." She closed her eyes, her heart pounding. It felt impossible. The power had erupted from a moment of pure terror, an instinct she couldn't replicate. She tried to remember the feeling, the scream that wasn't a scream, the surge of energy. Nothing. There was only the familiar emptiness. "I can't," she whispered, frustration making her voice shake. "There's nothing there." "Yes, there is," Kaylin insisted, his voice a low, soothing rumble. He stepped closer, so close she could feel the warmth of his body. "You're trying to force it. It's not a weapon you wield. It's a part of you. It's the echo of your wolf's spirit." He gently took her hands, turning them palms up. "Don't think about the assassin. Don't think about fighting. Think about me. Think about the first time we met, the spark. Think about the garden, the feeling of being safe." He guided her hands until they rested on his chest, directly over his heart. Its rhythm was a slow, powerful drum beneath her palms. "Feel that? That's your anchor. Now try again." She took a deep breath, focusing on the steady beat, on the warmth of his skin, on the scent of pine and wild earth. She let go of the anger and the fear, and instead reached for the fragile connection between them. A faint tingle started in her fingertips. A soft blue light, no bigger than a candle flame, flickered to life in her palms. It was weak, wavering, but it was there. She had called it on purpose. She had controlled it. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with wonder, and saw her own awe reflected in his stormy gaze. Chapter 14. The Serpent's Den. The small flame of power was a key, and it had unlocked a door inside her. Amara's senses sharpened. She started to notice things she'd never perceived before: the subtle thrum of the palace's ancient magical wards, the faint, lingering emotional residues left behind in empty rooms. And one morning, as she walked past the corridor leading to Lucian's private chambers, she felt it. A cold, slimy trail of dark magic, so faint that no ordinary shifter would ever detect it. It was the same corrupt energy she'd smelled on the sabotage chandelier. He was hiding something in there. Their investigation, which had been a slow, frustrating search for whispers, now had a physical target. The plan was terrifyingly simple. Klein would summon Lucian to a public, tedious, and mandatory council meeting on the opposite side of the palace. It was a flimsy pretext, but Lucian's arrogance was so great he would never imagine the true reason. The diversion would give Amara a window, a small, precious sliver of time to search his rooms. "It's too dangerous," Klein argued, his jaw tight. "If you're caught..." "You can't go," she countered, her new confidence startling them both. He would sense another alpha in his territory instantly. But me? I'm still just a ghost to him, a low-born girl who got lucky. He'll never suspect it. He finally, reluctantly, agreed. As Klein and Lucian faced off in the council chambers, Amara slipped through a hidden service passage, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The lock on the passage door that led into Lucian's rooms was old and simple. She picked it with a hairpin, a skill learned during her years in the foster system. The chambers were immaculate, decorated in cold shades of silver and black, and they smelled of expensive cologne and something else, something dry and dusty like old secrets. Guided by the faint magical resonance, she found it behind a false panel in his desk, a small leather-bound journal. It was filled with coded entries, but she didn't need a cipher to understand the names that appeared over and over. Drake, Klein, ceremony. She had found it. The proof. Just as she was about to slip back into the passage, her enhanced hearing caught the sound of approaching footsteps too soon. Her blood ran cold. She barely had time to slide the panel shut and melt back into the service corridor before the door to the main chamber opened. She had gotten away with it. Or so she thought. What she didn't know was that a single microscopic mote of her blue ethereal energy had been left behind, a unique magical signature that was, to a sorcerer like Lucian, as good as a fingerprint. He knew someone had been there, and he knew who. That evening, the palace erupted in scandal. A magical image, flawlessly doctored and distributed to every member of the royal council, appeared on their communication crystals. It showed Amara and Klein in the library, locked in what looked like a passionate, scandalous embrace. Chapter 15. The Price of a King. The scandal hit like a tidal wave. Lucian's move was brilliant in its cruelty. He hadn't just exposed a secret, he had crafted a lie that was more powerful than the truth. The image made Klein look reckless, a king ruled by lust, and it painted Amara as a manipulative seductress who had slept her way into the royal wing. It confirmed every vicious rumor Lucian had so carefully planted. The council was in an uproar. Amara watched from the shadows of a high gallery as they convened an emergency session. One by one, the grim-faced elders stood and condemned the king's indiscretion. They spoke of duty, of honor, of the purity of the royal line. They demanded that Klein cast Amara out, that he publicly renounce her to save his reputation before the ceremony, which was now only a day away. She felt 1,000 eyes on her, cold with judgment, and her hard-won confidence began to crumble. She was right back where she started, a low-born nobody, a stain on their perfect gilded world. Klein found her later in a deserted corridor, the moonlight from a high window striping the floor like prison bars. The weight of his crown seemed heavier than ever, his face etched with exhaustion and a barely contained rage. "They want me to send you away," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Amara's heart clenched. This was it. The moment her deepest fear came true. The moment the powerful man chose his power over the pawn. "And will you?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady, though her insides were shaking. "My duty is to my pack," he said, the words sounding rehearsed, hollow. "I have to maintain their trust. I have to project strength, especially now." The hurt was a physical blow, so sharp and sudden it stole her breath. After everything, the secrets, the shared danger, the flicker of blue flame, he was still a king and she was still disposable. "So that's it then?" she said, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "You use me to find your traitor, and then you throw me back in the gutter when I become inconvenient? I should have known. You're no different from any of them." She turned to leave, to run, to disappear back into the shadows where she belonged. "Don't you dare walk away from me," he growled, his voice a low, dangerous command. He grabbed her arm, spinning her back to face him. The carefully controlled mask of the king was gone. In his eyes was a raw, desperate turmoil that mirrored her own. "Do you think this is easy? Do you have any idea what they will do to you if I don't handle this carefully? They will tear you apart." "Let them try," she shot back, her own anger surging to meet his. "It's better than being your dirty little secret." "You are not a secret," he roared, his hands moving from her arm to frame her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones with a desperate tenderness that shattered her anger. The space between them crackled, the air thick with unspoken words and a tension that had been building since the moment he first saw her. "You are—" His voice broke. The slow burn was over. The dam had burst. He crushed his mouth to hers, and it wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a desperate, claiming act. A raw confession of everything he couldn't say. It was fire and lightning, a king's desperation and a woman's fury, all melting into a single, searing point of contact. In that moment, something inside her broke open. A deep, ancient recognition. The fated mate bond, a hum she had mistaken for attraction, roared to life, a tidal wave of pure, undeniable certainty. He was hers. She was his. The scandal, the council, the assassins, none of it mattered. They had crossed the point of no return. Chapter 16, The King's Decree. The kiss had changed the world. It had rewritten the laws of physics, turning the universe on its head and leaving Amara breathless in its wake. Fated mates. The words echoed in the space between them, a truth so profound it was terrifying. For a moment, standing there in the moonlit corridor, she had believed they could face anything. But the world outside their embrace had not changed. It was still cold, and it was still cruel. The next morning, Klein was summoned before the council again. He returned hours later, his face a mask of stone, the warmth from the previous night completely gone. He found her by the window in her room, and he didn't touch her. He stood a formal, kingly distance away. "I have a plan," he said, his voice clipped and official. "Lucian wants to use the ceremony to stage his coup. We will use it to expose him. The journal you found, it's the key. But to do that, I need the council on my side. Or at the very least, neutral." Amara waited, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. She didn't like the sound of this. "They are demanding a gesture," he continued, his eyes fixed on some point over her shoulder, refusing to meet hers. "A public reassurance to quell the scandal. I will be making a formal announcement this afternoon." He finally looked at her, and the king was back, his eyes shielded and distant. "I will announce that, for your part in the disruption, you will be removed from the palace, effective immediately after the ceremony." The words hit her like stones. Removed. It was a cold, clinical word. a word you used for trash. It's a lie, Amara, he added quickly, seeing the look on her face. A strategic lie. It will make Lucian believe he's won, that you're no longer a factor. He'll get sloppy. It gives us the opening we need. After we expose him, I will undo it all. I will tell them the truth. About you. About us. Her mind understood the logic. It was a sound plan. A king's plan. But her heart heard something else entirely. It heard the echo of every betrayal she had ever known. She watched him that afternoon from the shadows of the great hall as he stood before the assembled elders. He was magnificent, powerful, every inch the Alpha King. His voice boomed with authority as he spoke of duty and honor. And then he said the words. He spoke of the unfortunate influence of a low-born girl and promised the council that the distraction would be dealt with. He never looked at her, not once. And as the council members nodded in satisfaction, a cold, familiar numbness spread through Amara's veins. She had seen this play before. She knew how it ended. Chapter 17. A Serpent's Mercy. She fled back to her room, the king's cold public words chasing her down the corridor. He was playing a political game. Her mind screamed at her. It's a trick. But her soul whispered a darker truth. He chose his crown over you. The doubt was a poison, seeping into the cracks of her already fragile trust. She was staring out the window, feeling the gilded cage shrink around her, when a soft knock came at her door. It wasn't Klein. It was Lucian. She tried to slam the door in his face, but he was too strong, easily pushing his way inside, a look of faux sympathy on his handsome face. Her guards were nowhere in sight. I heard the king's decree, he said, his voice dripping with false pity. I must say I'm not surprised, but I am disappointed in him, to use a woman so callously and then discard her when she becomes inconvenient. It's a cruel thing. Get out, Amara hissed, her hands clenched into fists. A faint blue energy crackled at her fingertips, and Lucian's eyes widened in feigned surprise, though he knew exactly what it was. Temper, he soothed, taking a step back. I'm not your enemy, Amara. I've come to help. He leaned against the door, his posture relaxed, disarming. Did you really think he would choose you? A cleaner with a mysterious past? He has a duty. In fact, I happen to know he's already made a deal with Elder Titus to marry his daughter, Lyra. A political alliance to secure his reign after this messy business is over. You were just a means to an end, a tool to root out his enemies. The name hit her like a physical blow. Lyra, a tall, beautiful alpha female from a powerful family. The same woman she'd seen Klein laughing with in the hall just days ago. The same woman who had looked at Amara with such utter disdain. It all clicked into place, a perfect, horrible puzzle. The secret meetings, the public denial, the political marriage. It was a story she'd been taught to believe her entire life. The elite protect their own. They use and discard everyone else. He's lying, she whispered, but the words had no conviction. Lucian smiled, a sad, knowing expression that made her skin crawl. Am I? He just publicly branded you a disposable distraction. My offer is simple. Klein will have you removed after the ceremony, which likely means a quiet death in some dark alley. Or, you can leave now. I can arrange for safe passage out of the city. A new life. You'll be free. He was offering her mercy. A serpent's mercy. A chance to run, to disappear, to go back to being the ghost she was always meant to be. He was offering her an escape from the pain, and in that moment of shattered hope, it was the most tempting thing she had ever heard. Chapter 18. The Ghost's Retreat. Lucian left, his poisonous words lingering in the silent room like a foul scent. Amara sank onto the bed, the silken duvet feeling cold and foreign against her skin. It was all a lie. The connection she'd felt, the fated bond, the promise in his eyes. It was a fantasy she had allowed herself to believe because she was lonely and afraid. Klein was a king. Kings made alliances, kings made sacrifices, and she was a sacrifice. The thought was a cold, hard certainty that settled in the pit of her stomach. Her trauma, the lessons learned from her parents' bloody fate, rose up and screamed at her, "We told you so. We warned you. You cannot trust them. You cannot love them. To be seen by them is to be destroyed." She avoided him. When he came to her door, she pretended to be asleep. When he sent messages, she ignored them. She couldn't bear to see his face, to hear his strategic lies, to pretend that her heart wasn't breaking into 1,000 tiny pieces. She spent the hours in a haze of quiet despair, the world muted and gray. The fire inside her, the burning rage of the last Klein, had been extinguished, doused by the cold reality of her situation. All that was left were the ashes of a foolish girl's dream. The ceremony was tomorrow. Her removal was tomorrow. Lucian's offer of escape was her only option. Survival. It was the only thing she had ever known. Reverting to it felt like pulling on a familiar, worn-out coat. It wasn't warm, but it was hers. She waited until the deepest part of the night, when the palace was still and the guards were drowsy. She didn't pack the fine clothes she'd been given. She pulled on her own drab gray work uniform, the one she'd been wearing when this whole nightmare began. It felt right. It felt like her true skin. She looked around the beautiful room one last time. A prison. A trap. She grabbed the one thing that mattered, Lucian's journal. She didn't know why. Maybe as a weapon. Maybe as a final, bitter reminder of her own stupidity. Tucking it into her waistband, she slipped out of her room, a shadow moving through other shadows. She was a ghost again. It was safer this way. The core question of her new life, is it worth the risk of being seen, had been answered. And the answer was no. It was not worth the pain. It was not worth the betrayal. It was better to be invisible. It was better to be alone. She reached the outer gate, the promise of freedom and a life of lonely survival just a few feet away. Chapter 19. The Ghost at the Gate. The cold iron of the gate pressed against Amara's forehead. Freedom. It was right there. A few more steps and she could melt back into the city, become a nameless face in the crowd, and survive. It was the smart move. The only move. Her entire life, survival had been the one and only goal. But her feet wouldn't move. Her hand, resting on the latch, refused to lift it. Why? Why was she hesitating? A memory surfaced, unbidden. A faded, dreamlike image of her father, laughing as he lifted her onto his shoulders. The scent of her mother's wildflower perfume. They hadn't been victims. They had been alphas of a noble house. Warriors. Protectors. And they had been murdered for it. What had their sacrifice been for? So their last surviving child could spend her life running? So she could let their name, the Klein name, be whispered as a curse before vanishing forever? A low, resonant blast from a ceremonial horn echoed from the palace, shaking the very stones beneath her feet. The ceremony was beginning. Lucian was about to make his move. Klein was walking into a trap, and she was running away. A wave of shame, so potent it almost brought her to her knees, washed over her. Her despair was a selfish thing. Her heartbreak was a luxury. While she was wallowing in her own pain, a war was about to be lost. Lucian's victory wouldn't just be Klein's death, it would be the final absolute erasure of her family's legacy. The serpent who had devoured her parents would finally consume the throne they had died to protect. No. No. A single word. A silent roar in her soul. She would not run. She would not hide. She might die tonight. She might be betrayed. She might end up a forgotten footnote in their bloody history. But she would not be a coward. The ghost at the gate took a deep, shuddering breath and turned back towards the palace. Her retreat was over. The hunt was back on. The terror was still there, a cold snake coiling in her gut. But for the first time, it was smaller than her rage. It was smaller than her resolve. She wasn't fighting for a king who may or may not have broken her heart. She wasn't fighting for a fated bond that might have been a lie. She was fighting for the laughing man who had put her on his shoulders. She was fighting for the woman who smelled of wildflowers. She was fighting for the name they had given her. She slipped back through the shadows, no longer a frightened mouse fleeing a trap, but a wolf returning to the den, ready to bite. Her plan was no longer about escape. It was about seeing this through to its bitter, bloody end. Whatever happened, the story would not end with her running away. Chapter 20. A Promise in the Dust. Amara didn't return to the gilded cage of the royal wing. She went back to the world she knew best, the palace's hidden anatomy, the service corridors, the dusty, forgotten spaces between the walls. She moved with a familiar, silent confidence, her worn uniform a perfect camouflage. Her trust in Klein was a shattered thing, but her knowledge of this place, that was something she could rely on. He would fight his battle on the grand stage, with politics and power. She would fight hers from the shadows with secrets and whispers. Her new plan was desperate, reckless, and entirely her own. She would not be a damsel to be saved or a pawn to be sacrificed. She would be a ghost with a purpose. Lucian's journal was a heavy weight tucked against her skin, a constant reminder of the stakes. Her goal was to get into the rafters or a hidden gallery above the Great Hall. From there, she could watch everything. She could see Lucian's conspirators, identify his allies, and witness the coup as it unfolded. And if the moment was right, if a sliver of opportunity presented itself, she would find a way to expose him herself. Maybe she would drop the journal at the feet of an honest council elder. Maybe she would use her power to create a distraction. She didn't know how, but she knew she had to try. It was a suicidal mission, and she was terrifyingly, wonderfully calm. The fear of death was nothing compared to the fear of living a life of quiet regret. She found a narrow, winding staircase behind a loose stone panel in a linen closet, a secret passage she'd discovered months ago. It was choked with cobwebs and the smell of decay, a vertical tomb that snaked its way up to the high vaulted ceilings of the Great Hall. As she climbed, her hand brushed against the journal. Inside its pages was the proof of Lucian's treason, proof that her family had been hunted, proof that she wasn't crazy. It was her family's last will and testament, and she would see it honored. This was her final internal hurdle. She was no longer waiting for a king to give her a purpose or a title. She was Amara Klein, and she was taking her power back on her own terms. The climb was long and arduous, and with every step upward, she felt like she was shedding a layer of her old self, the frightened orphan, the invisible cleaner, the heartbroken girl. By the time she reached the top, she was someone new, someone her parents would have been proud of. Chapter 21. Thrown to the wolves. She emerged onto a narrow, dusty catwalk high above the Great Hall. Below her, the ceremony was in full swing. The hall was a sea of shifter nobility, a dazzling, dangerous tapestry of power and wealth. At the far end of the room, on a massive throne of dark wood and silver, sat Klein. He looked every inch the king, his face a mask of stoic indifference. But Amara could see what others couldn't. She saw the tension in his shoulders. She saw the way his eyes scanned the crowd, a restless, searching gaze. He was looking for her. And the flicker of raw desperation she saw in his expression when he didn't find her was a small, sharp crack in her own resolve. He knew she was gone. Did he care? Or was he just worried his pawn had run off the board? She pushed the thought away. It didn't matter. She crept along the catwalk, her eyes tracing the scene below. She saw them immediately. Lucian's men. Positioned strategically throughout the crowd, their hands resting on hidden weapons, their eyes fixed on their leader. Lucian stood near the front, radiating a smug, triumphant confidence. It was all happening exactly as he'd planned. Amara's heart pounded. She needed to do something. Now. She pulled the journal from her waistband, her mind racing. Who could she trust? Who could she get it to? Before she could make a move, a rough hand clamped over her mouth from behind. Another pair of arms pinned her, lifting her off her feet. Lucian's guards. They hadn't been looking for her. They had just been securing the high ground as a final precaution. She was just a ghost in the wrong place at the wrong time. She struggled, kicking and thrashing, but it was useless. They were too strong. They dragged her from the catwalk, down a short flight of stairs, and through a heavy door. Suddenly, she was blinded by the light of 1,000 candles. She was thrust out onto a high balcony overlooking the throne. "Your Majesty!" Lucian's voice boomed through the now silent hall. "It seems we have found a traitor in our midst." The guards forced her to her knees, then shoved her forward. She tumbled down the short flight of stairs from the balcony, landing in a heap on the marble floor right at the foot of the throne. A collective gasp went through the crowd. She looked up, dazed and humiliated, her drab cleaner's uniform a stark contrast to the opulence around her. Lucian stood on the balcony above, a look of vicious triumph on his face. The cleaner, caught trying to flee the palace after conspiring against the throne, a clear sign of her guilt. Amara's eyes lifted to meet Kaylin's. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated thunder. The king was gone. All that was left was the wolf, and his eyes promised death. Chapter 22. The Ghost's Fire. Humiliation was a fire that licked at Amara's skin. She lay on the cold marble, the collective gasp of 1,000 shifters sucking the air from the hall. Lucian's triumphant words echoed in the sudden, ringing silence. This was it, the end of her story, a traitor's death. But as she looked up, past the sneering face of Lucian, she saw Klein, and the look in his eyes was not disappointment. It was not anger at her. It was a promise of pure, undiluted annihilation aimed directly at Lucian. The king descended the steps of the throne, not with the measured tread of a ruler, but with the silent, deadly grace of a predator. The crowd parted before him like the sea. He didn't stop to address the council. He didn't spare a glance for Lucian. He walked directly to Amara. He knelt before her, in front of everyone, and gently helped her to her feet. The act was so shocking, so utterly defiant of all protocol, that a wave of murmurs rippled through the hall. "The king is compromised," Lucian shouted, his voice straining. "He is bewitched by this low-born conspirator." "She is no conspirator," Kaylin's voice boomed, amplified by his alpha power, silencing the crowd. "She is the one who uncovered your treason." He held out his hand. "The journal, Amara." Her hand trembled as she pulled the journal from her waistband and placed it in his. Klein held it up for all to see. "In this book is Alpha Lucian's entire plan. A plot to murder me, to seize my throne, and to undo the peace my father built." "Lies," Lucian snarled. "Fabricated by a desperate girl and a weak king. Seize them." His men, positioned throughout the hall, drew their blades and began to advance. The royal guards moved to intercept, and the hall teetered on the brink of civil war. Lucian himself lunged, not at Klein, but at Amara, a silver dagger appearing in his hand. He would silence her for good. Klein moved to block him, but Lucian was fast. It was the same scenario from the library, a silver blade, a man she couldn't lose. But this time, there was no surprise, no instinct. There was only a choice. Amara lifted her hands, and the rage and the fear and the love she felt for the man beside her coalesced into a single point of blinding light. The blue fire erupted from her, not as a chaotic wave, but as a controlled, focused shield of pure energy that slammed into Lucian and his men, sending them flying backward. The hall fell into a stunned, absolute silence. Amara stood, her hands still glowing with ethereal fire. The last daughter of a lost line, her power revealed for all to see. Klein looked at her, his eyes blazing with pride and love. He turned to the stunned assembly. "This is not a low-born girl," he declared. his voice ringing with absolute authority. "This is Amara of the House of Klein, the last of the royal battle mages. And she is not my mistress. She is my fated mate, your future queen." Chapter 23. The Silence of the Throne. In the aftermath, the Great Hall was a study in shock. Lucian and his stunned conspirators were dragged away by the royal guard, their faces masks of disbelief and defeat. The fight had been brutally short. Once exposed and separated from his allies by Amara's power, Lucian's bravado had crumbled, leaving only a snarling, desperate wolf who was no match for an enraged alpha king. Now, a new kind of silence filled the chamber. It was the silence of a world remade. The ancient, noble families, the powerful alphas, the haughty council elders, they all stared at Amara. They were not looking at a cleaner anymore. They were looking at a living legend. They saw the ghostly blue fire that still clung to her fingertips. They saw the Alpha King standing at her side, his hand resting possessively on her back, marking her as his. They saw power, and they saw destiny. One by one, they bowed their heads. First the lower-ranking members, then the alphas, and finally the council elders who had, just an hour ago, demanded her removal. It was a silent, universal apology, an acknowledgement of a new reality. Amara stood tall, her chin held high, but inside she was trembling. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a dizzying sense of disbelief. She met the eyes of Elder Titus, the powerful wolf whose daughter Lucian had claimed was her replacement. He looked at her not with contempt but with a new grudging respect and fear. They all feared her now. The thought should have made her feel powerful, but it only made her feel lonely. She had traded one kind of invisibility for another. She was no longer a ghost, but she was no longer just Amara either. She was a symbol, a legend, a queen. Klein seemed to sense her turmoil. He leaned in, his voice a low whisper meant only for her. "It's over." He gently took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers, a warm, solid anchor in the swirling sea of her new life. He led her from the throne, away from the bowing heads and the awestruck whispers. They walked through the hall, and this time the crowd parted for her. They were not making way for a cleaner's cart. They were making way for their queen. As they passed through the grand doors and left the chaos behind, Amara took a deep breath. She had survived. She had won. But she had no idea what came next. The path ahead was a complete unknown, a future she had never, in her wildest dreams, allowed herself to imagine, and she would have to walk it with the king who had both broken her heart and saved her life. Chapter 24. The scent of moonlight and ash Klein didn't take her back to the royal wing. He led her through the quiet palace, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls, until they stepped out into the cool night air of the moonlit garden. The scent of night-blooming jasmine filled the air, a sweet, clean perfume that washed away the coppery smell of blood and fear from the great hall. This was where it had all begun, in a way, the place of their first real conversation, their first fragile connection. They stood in silence for a long time, the moon casting long shadows on the stone path. Finally, Klein turned to her, and the king was gone. It was just the man, his stormy eyes filled with a raw vulnerability that made her heart ache. "I am so sorry, Amara," he said, his voice thick with regret. "My plan, my strategy. I was a fool. I was so focused on the politics, on trapping Lucian, that I didn't see the wound I was inflicting on you. I never should have said those words. I never should have made you feel for 1 second that you were disposable to me." Amara looked at their joined hands. "I heard what my head knew was a lie," she whispered, "but what my heart had been taught to believe was the truth. My whole life I've known that people like me are just pieces in a game for people like you. When I heard you say those things, it felt like the world was finally making sense again." She met his gaze, her own eyes shining with unshed tears. "I'm sorry I ran." I'm sorry I didn't trust you." "Don't you dare apologize," he said, his voice fierce. He stepped closer, framing her face with his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away the tears she didn't realize had fallen. "Trust is earned, and I failed you. But I will spend the rest of my life earning it back. I swear it." He leaned in, and this time, his kiss was not the desperate claiming act of the corridor. It was a promise. It was soft and deep and full of a reverence that healed something broken inside her. It was a vow of forever. When he pulled away, he rested his forehead against hers. "You were never a piece in my game, Amara," he murmured. "From the moment I saw you in the hall, you were the only thing that mattered." The fated bond between them was no longer a confusing pull or a shocking revelation. It was a quiet, steady warmth, a feeling of coming home. She was no longer a ghost, and he was no longer alone. Together they stood under the moonlight, two survivors, a king and a queen, looking up at the stars, ready to build a new world from the ashes of the old one.